Hi, welcome to Cubs and Culture for 1/14/2019. I'm sick of the Harper and Machado drum beats because until those two guys sign, there's not going to be any movement. Machado is allegedly going to be signing with the White Sox, quite possibly, because he was over 8 years, $250 million. There's absolutely nothing on Harper. Anyway, so we're up to The Deer Hunter, which is the first film directly involving Vietnam that won Best Picture. There's only a few of these. Platoon's the other sort of major one that touches upon Vietnam, and of course Forrest Gump. Anyway, I'm not nearly as enamored with this film as a lot of other people. I like the film. I think it's a very strong film. Michael Cimino, I think that's how you say his name. He basically made, I believe it was 3 films. Okay, more or less 3 films in the American system because he famously made this film called Heaven's Gate, which was so poorly received, especially at the box office, and then it went over budget and shooting schedule so much that it was absolutely horrifying. Like, it absolutely was an albatross, and it actually bankrupted United Artists. Any case, one of the things about The Deer Hunter, the film, is it really feels to me like a promising director making his first serious work, and it's not as polished as it could have been in terms of no, surprising one editing, in terms of concept, because there's a lot of interesting ideas and sort of interesting ideas that are sort of half-baked, and probably the biggest issue with the film is the pace. Anyway, let me bring the trailer and the clips. I'll see you in a sec. Okay, so The Deer Hunter tells the story of a group of blue-collar steel workers from Pennsylvania going off to Vietnam and then coming back and dealing with being reintegrated into society. It's actually reminds me a little bit of Best Years of Our Lives, because there's basically 3 different guys. There's that guy, Steven, and then there's that guy, Nick, and then there's Michael, who's played by Robert De Niro, who's sort of the main character. And then also sort of in, so you have all 3 guys, and then each of them sort of have a story, and they're kind of positioned a little bit like Best Years of Our Lives, where one is dealing with physical disability, which is Steven. And then Nick is dealing with mental breakdown, and Mike is having to try to hold them all together. Ultimately, I do like this film. I do think there's a couple of pretty massive structural issues. The first one is the movie is not nearly as emotionally involving as you would want a film like this to be, because it's very, 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 very slow, and it's not so much scene concepts have to be moved, or scenes have to be tightened up. It's somewhat in the screenplay, because like the movie it's basically broke down into 3 acts. And the first act is the wedding, which is before, where you get all the background and everything like that. Then there's the Vietnam, and then there is adjusting to going back home. More or less, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but more or less. Well, the first act, despite I think it's actually the best part of the film overall, it's very, very slow feeling, because once you get to the wedding, once the wedding occurs, you just sort of stay in the wedding, and like it's almost an hour of the wedding and reception. And even though there's French scenes and the plot seem moving along, you just get sort of stuck in the same area. And Cimino and his editor do manage to keep it alive, so it doesn't bore you, but it feels a lot slower. than it should have been. And so by the time you get to Vietnam, it's almost a relief because you're out of the wedding sequence and everything like that. So it has sort of a weird momentum in terms of its narrative because of that. So there's that issue. And then the other sort of structural issue and what I'm showing the Russian roulette scenes is that it's very much naturalistic throughout most of the film. There's sort of an easy naturalism to all the cast and everything like that. There's a pretty, the wedding, small town stuff is very authentically blue collar, etc. But every once in a while, there's these touches that make the story feel grandiose or operatic. And it's not just the Russian roulette scenes. The other scene I'm pointing out is the whole, if you, in the wedding where they're doing that double drink between Stephen and his wife, if a drop spills, you'll have bad fortune, and she spills three drops. So obviously each of the characters are going to have misfortune. And it doesn't really fit all that well with the naturalism of the rest of the film and sort of this slow slice of life stuff you get at the beginning of the film, which is actually very strikingly authentically steelworker and blue collar, and I really like it. So this sequence right here, the Russian roulette stuff, is the most famous stuff in the film, because the climax is actually Nick sort of breaks here mentally, and so he ends up just staying in Vietnam and playing Russian roulette until he ends up killing himself, as the odds would indicate at the end, which is the climax. But this is sort of the first scene. Now, there's several... I sort of love-hate this scene and the Russian roulette element because it's a really striking central image for a film. And if you're talking about sort of a good way of dramatizing existential dread for soldiers, having them play Russian roulette is absolutely perfect, especially since in terms of Vietnam, where America, lost that war more or less, it was sort of like shooting ourselves in the head, and it really sort of works on all those levels of being senseless random violence, striking brutality, and everything like that. Now, the issue with it is such a striking symbol and everything like that it sort of stands out from the naturalism. But the other sort of major issue is this stuff right here, where they get captured by the Viet Cong and they are being forced to play Russian roulette, is all the stuff of all the material involving the Viet Cong, which reduces and simplifies the war into a struggle against good versus evil, because there's no complexity to the Viet Cong. They're just sadistic, alien people, enemies, and they're treated very similar to how, like, in the 40s, actual literal war propaganda against the Japanese were treated. And that sort of... it's not so much that it bothers me that we have no documented cases of this happening, because it feels plausible that this might have happened sometime during war. What the issue is, it so simplifies the Viet Cong that it stands out, and the movie is lesser for that sort of betrayal, because the Vietnam is the one war where you really shouldn't simplify it down into good versus evil, because it wasn't that simple. Now, this scene right here is another one of those places where I feel like the film goes a little bit too far in terms of the operatic stuff, and to make it seem more grandiose. Because Nick, Mike, and Steven are already all signed up for joining the various branches of the military. I think they're in different branches. It doesn't really matter. And they're at the wedding. And they meet this Green Beret army guy. And he's just basically going to say fuck it, meaning fuck the war. And he's very disillusioned and everything like that. And no one knows who this guy is. No one knows who he is. He's not like the best man. He's not like a mutual friend. He's not like a member of the wife's family. He's just a veteran who wanders in because they're having a VFW hall, and it's like the scene feels a little bit contrived to me because of that. And it's supposed to be like foreshadowing because they're all sort of like gung-ho for the war and this guy's not, and you can see it as like, oh, that's their future, that's foreshadowing, but it feels very, very forced to me. So like it's an interesting idea to sort of frame it in this way and have this material within the story, and it's the scene's ultimately sort of okay in that regard because of that, and it's largely works, but a better filmmaker or a more mature filmmaker would have made him a member of the wedding party. Now, the reason why I'm harping on this sort of stuff is there's this one scene towards the end, and this is when Vietnam is basically over. Because the movie plays out basically across the entire ending part of the war. And Steven has lost both his legs. Nick has killed himself because he just sort of has a mental breakdown and drug addict and eventually gets killed during Russian roulette. And Michael is emotionally stunted and he's not able to process it. And so this is just after Nick's funeral. And they're going to sing God Bless America. And it's really hard to find what, like, it's really hard to understand. It's really, and like, not in a good way, as in like, oh, the emotion here is hard to deal with because it's painful. I mean, like, it's hard to figure out exactly what the film is trying to portray here. In terms of their use of God Bless America, because on one hand, you could read the scene as sarcasm, that America's military venturism will ruin these three guys' lives, and it was totally unnecessary. And so in that way, they're being somewhat sarcastic. On another way, they're actually being patriotic and commemorating the dead and the death of America. And everything like that. And I don't know how, and I don't think the film I don't think the film is trying to be ambiguous, whereas the director thinks it should be ironic or sarcasm, but the characters are being patriotic. I think the film, I don't like, it feels like the idea is not formed in the context of the story. That it's not that it's ambiguous and it's intentionally ambiguous. It's the director is unsure and the writer is unsure exactly what he's trying to say, and therefore the scene doesn't really work. And so part of this has to do with the pace, because by the time you get to this scene, it's been 3 hours, and the scene plays out very, very slowly, and you're kind of at that point done with the film and everything like that. And so the emotion, like, the scene is still emotional because Nick, Christopher Walken's really good as Nick, and he's a very interesting character, very striking character, and it's very Christopher Walken. But apart from all of that, you're not, like, the emotion's nowhere near as powerful as it could have been because of this maddening and ineffective, not fully formed idea. In any case, so I do recommend you see this film. It's a very interesting, it's sort of a conservative, I guess, take on Vietnam. The acting's very good. It very much feels like a film by a filmmaker who had a lot of promise, but then he sort of collapsed at the end. With Heaven's Gate. Any case, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Cubs and Culture out.